And this interviews, which was conducted independently and published by Ukrainian journalists who are actually very pro-Maidan, they stated that in these interviews, two these Svoboda leaders stated that they met in a few weeks before the Maidan massacre. They met with some Western government representative. They did not name this person, but they said that they had discussion. What would it take for Western governments to stop supporting or stop recognizing Yanukovych and his government in Ukraine? And so they had debates about this, and Western officials said that it would be necessary to have that Western policy would change only if 100 people would be kind of if the number of killed protesters or if the number of victims on the Maidan would reach 100.
The interesting thing then is that apparently the judiciary in Ukraine works quite independently, right? It is not under far-right control in that sense, at least some parts of it. But on the other hand, also that even that all of that can still be ignored in order to push a narrative that is very kind to the West still supplying to still keep using Ukraine as a tool against Russia.
I think it's more complex in Ukraine because judicial system, specifically in such highly politicized decision, is often dependent on the executive. Basically, they can receive call from office of president who would tell them what kind of decision to issue or would influence their decision. So they lack independence, but they still have certain independence. And in terms of far right, again, there were actually two attacks on this. I think 3 attacks on this style by far right activists. They for instance, they went inside of this trial during the live broadcast, which I was watching, and they tried to interrupt trial and basically were shooting, saying that police was responsible for the mass murder and so on, and they certain judge and so on and jury openly. In another case, they put vehicle tires in front of the court which examines this massacre, and they threatened to burn tires and burn entire building if the decision will be different. And so this is like example. And the judge in charge of this trial, presiding judge, he was beaten by one of Maidan activists, and there was no investigation, no conviction in this case. So this is just one example. So it's not like completely control like in the Soviet Union, for instance, during communist times. This degree of independence, and for this reason, court decision was kind of compromised. So they could not issue kind of decision based on evidence. So they had to kind of still basically because if they would issue a decision based on the evidence which was presented, publicly available, they would face very kind of negative reactions. They could be again totally dismissed. Like even for instance, Zelensky dismissed Constitutional Court because he did not like decisions that they issue, so he just dismissed entire court, and he kidnapped one judge in Moldova because he was issuing again decisions. So this is like kind of in Ukraine, and they can be attacked by far right, so they have issue. So their decision was kind of compromised decision. So they stated. In the verdict, they stated that there were snipers beyond. This was categorical conclusion of the verdict that there were snipers located in Hotel Ukraina, which they stated also specifically that this Hotel Ukraina was not controlled by law enforcement, or by Berkut or any other law enforcement agencies, but was controlled by Maidan activists. And they stated that there was definitely shooting from this hotel, that there were testimonies of 19 witnesses during the trial about snipers located in this Hotel Ukraina buildings, and they stated that many protesters were shot, killed or wounded from this hotel, which was controlled by Maidan activists. And they stated also that BBC television crew was shot by Maidan activists from the Hotel Ukraina. And this video of this BBC, this event which took place, they said this was and they specifically stated that specific protesters were shot from the Hotel Ukraina, killed, and the shots were aimed specifically at these protesters. So this was not just some kind of a random shooting or just a crossfire. They were specifically killed from top floors of Hotel Ukraina. So there were no police, no government officers nearby, and they stated that. Again, according to official court verdict, they stated that at least 9 protesters were not killed by Berkut, and many protesters were not wounded by Berkut. So this is like decision. They stated that in at least 6 cases, they stated that Maidan protesters were killed by snipers in Hotel Ukraina or other Maidan controlled locations like Music Conservatory, which I mentioned, and also they stated that this far-right group, which I mentioned, which initially was based in Music Conservatory, was also in the Hotel Ukraina. They were shooting from the Hotel Ukraina. So this is like official verdict. And they stated also, but because again this was compromise, so they cannot just issue such a kind of whole decision, kind of a whole case dismissal. There was, I think, very important also kind of consideration that they stated that 31 protesters were killed by Berkut. So this is a kind of decision which they based on just one single forensic examination of bullets, which was conducted in 2019, and which reversed all previous, like 40 other forensic ballistic examination bullets, was reversed by this one decision, which was issued in 2019. Again, and so they accepted this one forensic examination of bullets, which kind of, and they based this entire verdict of guilt of Berkut on this one forensic examination, which is kind of
Berkut is the government forces. Yes.
Yes, they blame these government forces, and this is why kind of. But again, they dismiss evidence. They even dismiss testimonies of wounded Maidan protesters who testified they were shot from Hotel Ukraina and wounded from Hotel Ukraina, because they stated this is like bullets which match their location, and this is, I think, based on total kind of on totally falsified evidence, because this. I have videos, synchronized videos, which show that moments when police were shooting did not coincide with moments when protesters were killed and wounded. And in addition to this, even kind of only 80, even this examination only looked into 80 cases of wounded protesters out of 172 protesters who were wounded on this day. And because official government investigation stated that now I think almost I think would be. Yes, 92 protesters were shot from other locations than Berkut locations, and they did not investigate this, who shot them. So this means even now, along with verdict by this decision and official government investigation, there is official admission in Ukraine that the absolute majority of wounded protesters were shot by some other snipers, not by government, not by Berkut kind of police, who were blamed for this massacre. And there is no investigation, no media reports, nothing. This is quite incredible. And again, this is never mentioned. Kind of, and Wikipedia again totally suppresses this, and this is just, for me, this is quite, this is has no precedent to have such blatant kind of propaganda, blatant censorship of such crucial information, and nobody basically cares. Nobody, even so, they claim they support Ukraine and Ukrainians, but I think this is quite unbelievable to witness this, and this is all publicly in court verdict, which I cite in my studies, and which is I also stated.
Yeah, it's all out in the open. But maybe one more question, because if you listen to the media in the West and so on, what you usually hear is the claim goes so far as that they tend to argue or say that the shooting of the protesters was even ordered by Viktor Yanukovych. Those are some of the claims that just fly out over there. Beside the fact that obviously these shooters were all connected to the Maidan protests themselves and the far right. So do we know, or do you know, who ordered these shootings, or do you think they were just perpetrated by a group of far right people who were actually under nobody's control, really? What's your theory? Who ordered the shooting?
I think this is also a very important and crucial issue, because this kind of Yanukovych and his government were blamed for the massacre immediately by the Maidan opposition, by all the media and Western officials, including Biden, and this is why kind of they supported his overthrow, because he was deemed to be responsible for this mass murder. But my research found no evidence of any order from Yanukovych or any government officials to massacre Maidan protesters. So this is what I mentioned in my studies. But the government investigation claims that he issued such orders. to massacre Maidan protesters, even so they never revealed any evidence during Maidan massacre trial. So there was no evidence presented during Maidan massacre trial about any order from Yanukovych, his government ministers, or even commanders from Berkut to issue any order to massacre Maidan protesters. And now, official verdict from Ukrainian trial by judges and jury issued decision which specifically stated that there was no order from Yanukovych or his government officials. There was no evidence of any order from Yanukovych or his government officials to massacre Maidan protesters. So they stated this in verdict, and this is they basically. Now and again, this is, I think, even more important that confirmation that this was there were just other elements of this Maidan verdict, because this blaming Yanukovych and his government was used to justify overthrow of his government, which led to all of this consequences and escalation of the conflicts. And now you have again official verdict from this Maidan massacre trial, which I also publicized on my social media, on Twitter, but total silence from the media and total silence from politicians, from government officials. Nobody even mentions this, and they continue to repeating the same false information that Yanukovych was responsible for issued order for this Maidan massacre. But in terms of who actually issued order, I also mentioned this in my study, what I found, again, looking into publicly available information, and and there was a book published, which I have in my bookshelf in the back. This book was published by 2 Ukrainian journalists in Ukraine. And they interviewed different Maidan activists, different Maidan opposition leaders at the time of Maidan massacre. It was called Maidan Secret Files. So they published these interviews in Ukrainian in Kyiv. And in these interviews, you have admissions by 2 leaders of far-right Svoboda party, by leader of this party, Ternibok, and by his deputy, Koshalinsky, who was also deputy head of Ukrainian parliament during the Maidan massacre. And he played a very active role in overthrow Yanukovych, because he became in charge of the Ukrainian parliament during Maidan massacre, which by blaming, Maidan massacre on Yanukovych. And these interviews, which was conducted independently and published by Ukrainian journalists who are actually very pro-Maidan, they stated that in these interviews, 2 these Svoboda leaders stated that they met in a few weeks before the Maidan massacre. They met with some Western government representative. They did not name this person, but they said that they had discussion. What would it take for Western governments to stop supporting or stop recognizing Yanukovych and his government in Ukraine? And so they had debates about this, and Western officials said that it would be necessary to have that Western policy would change only if 100 people would be if the number of killed protesters or if the number of victims on the Maidan would reach 100 protesters, because then already 3 protesters were killed, and again evidence this shows that they were killed by Maidan opposition, because nobody was charged with the murder. But then they debated. They said opposition said 3 people. Western government representatives said no, it's not enough. Like 5 people, no, not enough. Like 20 people, not enough. So they agreed on 100 people, and this is like what happened immediately after the massacre. There was Maidan opposition, and media declared that there was heavily hunted of Maidan activists who were killed, and so this number included all Maidan activists who were killed not only on February 20th but also on other locations and on other days. So they tried to reach 100 number specifically, and they still could not reach 100 number. So they included people who died from illnesses, one who died from suicide, another died after Maidan from infection, because in kitchen and so on. So included people, and they even included Party of Region computer administrator who was killed by Maidan activists on February 18 during storming of headquarters of Party of Region. So they included everybody basically in order to have 100 people killed, and this is what this is again not a coincidence, because this is what happened, and this was in advance basically condition for Western governments basically to change their support for kind of basically stop recognition of Yanukovych government, and this happened exactly as was agreed during this meeting between far-right opposition leaders and other Maidan opposition leaders with Western government representative, because immediately Biden called Yanukovych and told, and this was mentioned in Biden in his memoirs, he basically blamed Yanukovych for Maidan massacre on February 20th without any investigation, and he told Yanukovych that Yanukovych need to kind of leave not only his position as president of Ukraine, but also he need to leave in, and this is like kind of no investigation, nothing, and this was what happened. Immediately Western governments, they recognized Maidan opposition as a new government, even so there was agreement initially kind of mediated and signed by with involvement of European Union ministers from France, from Germany, and from Poland, and between Maidan opposition and Yanukovych government to have to have early elections, presidential elections, and to withdraw all units from Kyiv, downtown Kyiv, including opposition and government forces, and to investigate Maidan massacre. But this agreement was violated immediately by Maidan opposition members who actually says government offices, and this is what, and there was also assassination attempts against Yanukovych, and this is how this led to kind of a change of the Ukrainian government. But there was also recognition by Obama. In his interview after Maidan massacre, he stated, in interview to CNN, he stated that the United States government played a role in political transition in Ukraine, or transition of power in Ukraine after this massacre, right after this massacre, and before Yanukovych even fled Ukraine. So this is, I think, admission that this massacre, that there is Western involvement in this overthrow of Yanukovych government, but there is no evidence of involvement of any like Western snipers and so on in this massacre. But there is clear involvement of Western governments in this regime change policy which took place, and they specifically this is kind of would be basically to state to opposition leaders that specifically far-right opposition leaders that they can get power basically after 100 people will be killed. This is like would be the same kind of incentive, kind of a quasi target to use this, and this is exactly what happened. So I think this is what I found based on my research using only publicly available evidence. And again, this is total silence about this, I think, crucial kind of event. And I mentioned this in Oliver Stone documentary Civilian Ukraine, this evidence again, but there is media totally silenced by the media, because again, this is political inconvenience, so this is not reported, and instead they blame all this on Yanukovych government, even so there is no evidence. And now you have opposite situation. Even a verdict from the Ukrainian trial stated that he was not involved in giving any order for the Maidan massacre, and his government officials and ministers also do not give any order or commanders of police and forces. Again, this is now confirmed, but again, total silence, and again, and all other sources like media silent about this, and Wikipedia also they also omitted this crucial development, crucial case. This is, for me, this is quite unprecedented, but I think as researchers, this is also very important, because this reveals how can, despite all this evidence, it's very easy to misrepresent this by just relying on control and or seizure of control over such tools of communication. And this is, I think, not acceptable in democracies, because this undermines the very nature of democracies, and this is major case of violation of human rights, anti-democratic development, which is also has very important relevance to this conflict in Ukraine. And I think origins of this war go back to this Maidan massacre. And if people knew about this origins of this war, I think peaceful resolution of this conflict would have been much earlier possibility, and this could have ended much faster, and this would have been much more beneficial to Ukraine compared to what we're witnessing right now.
Of course, Professor Katchanovski, this is so incredible, and that is why it is so easy to dismiss it as a conspiracy theory, because if it ever turns out, and at some point, history tends to produce these documents, that there was a meeting between mid or high level Western officials with the far right, telling them 100 need to die. Well, I mean, that's as deprived as it gets. I have no problems believing that, because we know that things like this have happened in the past. They have happened in the Soviet Union. They have happened in the United States. The CIA that was involved in several very highly violent coups and overthrows, also in Latin America, where people were a lot of people died. But that it happened again in 2014. And then is being blamed 100% reversed on the other side, on Russia and on Yanukovych, when it was the West and the supporters, the far right, the ultra far right, which is then the reason why the Russians talk about Nazis in Ukraine. You know, it just makes everything so much worse. Your research, Professor, is absolutely vital, and I hope that you will publish books and that we will talk about it again, and that at some point this will be picked up. This history cannot be suppressed forever. Is there anything you would like to add to what you've said?
I think this is very important also that you kind of try to talk about these issues, because this total silence by the mainstream media about Maidan massacre, and I do not expect that based on previous coverage of this trial, which was again almost totally ignored in the Western media, and the same applies to anniversary of the start of Maidan protests last November. So I don't expect the same kind of coverage, because this is, I think, and this is why it's so important to discuss these issues, for people to know this. And I think you do in this case very important service by talking about this issue, and by raising this issue about Maidan massacre, because again, this is quite unprecedented event, and misrepresentation of this event is very crucial, and has very significant consequences, in addition to this massacre itself, which was again tremendous in terms of consequences. And as I mentioned in my book, forthcoming book, this is massacre which changed the world, and changed the history, and would affect, I think, people not only in Ukraine but many other countries.
When will the book come out?
So first, have a first book which will be published, is supposed to be published this summer, and another book, again, speaking about Maidan massacre, would be published in the fall, or scheduled to publish in the fall of this year. So this so I expect to publish.
So what we will do is we will talk about it again when the first book comes out. Please write me an email. We will talk about it again when the second book comes out, and we will repeat. We just repeat, because repetition is very important in order to fight these lies, just outward lies, and that are now being picked up. And the thing is, most of the journalists in the West, they don't do their jobs anymore. So academics actually have to go out and shake people and say, like, guys, can we please have real journalism again? And we have good journalists, but all of the good journalists are actually on the other on YouTube platforms, and not on CNN and so on. It is a crazy time. But Professor Katchanovski, thank you very much for your time today.
Okay, thank you.